This is Coach Coble, and in this video, we will be simplifying radical expressions with and without variables. Make sure you take notes and bring them to class. Tomorrow, you will be shown several examples in this video, and this will serve to you as a guide when you begin your independent practice in simplifying radical expressions. In example 1, I have the square root of 60. My goal is to make sure that I get the square root of 60 to its simplest form. So my first step is to make sure that I do a factor tree as we have already practiced in class. As you can see, I know that 60, if I do 3 times 20, that will give me 60. I will then break down 20, which can be 10 times 2, and then I can break down 10, which will give me 5 times 2. Once I completed all of my factors and broke it down, I'm then going to circle all the numbers that are prime. Remember what we said in class. A prime number is a number that can only be divided by 1 and itself. Since I'm doing the square root of 60, that means that the square, which also means 2. So in order for anything to be on the outside of the square root, I must have a pair, which means I must have 2 of the same thing in order for it to be on the outside. So in this example, I have 2 2's. So I highlight those 2 2's to remind myself that that number 2 goes on the outside of the square root. So now that I have my 2 representing the pair of 2's that I had is on the outside of the square root. Whatever don't have a pair stays on the inside of the square root. So I had a 3 and a 5. Once I simplify everything, that means I'll be multiplying all the numbers on the outside and all the numbers on the inside of the square root. So since I do not have another number with 2 on the outside, it will just be 2, and then 3 times 5 will be 15. So the simplified answer of the square root of 60 is really 2 times the square root of 15. In example 2, I have the square root of 125. So my first step is to do my factorization tree. So I break it down. I know that 125, if I multiply 5 times 25, will give me 125. Then I can break down 25. That'll give me 5 times 5. So now all I have is prime numbers. Now after that, I can now circle all my prime numbers. Now I need to see if I have any pairs. Remember, I need a pair in order for that to represent one number outside of the square root. So in this case, I have 2 5's. I will highlight those that pair of 5's because it represents square, meaning 2. So that will represent one number on the outside of the square root. Anything that does not have a pair goes on the inside of the square root. Now the 2 5's creates 1 5 on the outside, and I am left over with 1 5 on the inside of the square root. So my answer the simplified answer for the square root of 125 is 5 times the square root of 5. You will be presented with problems that has numbers outside of the square root. That's okay, because for right now, we're not going to worry about that 5. But we are going to use factorization to break down 64. So 32 times 2 will give me 64. 16 times 2 will give me 32. 4 times 4 will give me 16. And then 2 times 2 will give me 4. and 2 times 2 will give me 4. I then circle all my prime numbers. I'm then going to highlight all pairs. So in this case, I have 3 pairs of 2's, which means that 3 2's will be on the outside of the square root. Once I take the 3 2's out, I then bring the 5 in to be multiplied with those 3 2's. So I have 2 times 2 times 2 times 5, square root of nothing on the inside. Don't worry. If you don't have no numbers inside of the square root, just drop the square root. It's done. It's out. It's over. So all I have to do is multiply 2 times 2 times 2 times 5, and that will give me the answer of 40. So 5 times the square root of 64 is simply the number 40. Now we're going to step it up a little bit because now we have numbers and we have variables under the radical. Don't worry, it works the same way as with just numbers. Okay, so my first step is that I'm going to break down 10 through factorization, which will give me 5 times 2. Then for x to the 5th power, I'm going to write x 5 times. Then for y to the 6th power, I'm going to write y 6 times. I have now broken down 10 x to the 5th, y to the 6th. Now my next step is to highlight all pairs. So since 5 and 2 don't have no pairs, they do not get highlighted. But I do have 2 pairs of x's and I have 3 pairs of y's. Now, be careful with this next step because it's going to change a little bit, so just bear with me. Just like with the other problems that we have done, any pairs go on the outside and anything that's not a pair stays on the inside of the square root. So I have x times x, y times y times y. So when I give my final answer, I'm going to write it x squared to represent the 2 pairs of x's I had under the radical, y cubed to represent the 3 pairs of y's I have, times 5 times 2 times x, which is the square root of 10. So my final answer for the simplified version of 10x to the 5th power y to the 6th is simply x squared times y cubed times the square root of 10x. This is the last example and the most complex example of this video. So I have 2 times the square root of 84 p squared times y to the 5th. As usual, like I said earlier in the video, any numbers on the outside, we're not going to worry about it. So that 2 I'm not worried about. What I am going to do is that I'm going to break down 84 through factorization. So 42 times 2 is 84. 21 times 2 is 42. And 7 times 3 is 21. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to write 2 times 2 times 3 times 7 to represent 84. Then I do p times p, and then I write down 5 y's to represent y to the 5th. I highlight my pairs, and I see that I have a pair of 2's, a pair of p's, and 2 pairs of y's. So before I pull any numbers from the outside, I'm gonna go ahead and bring that 2 down from earlier. So it's going to be 2 times p times y, and on the inside it's going to be the square root of 3 times 7 times y, since they did not have a pair. So my answer, when I break it down, it will be 4 p y squared times the square root of 21y. Once again, make sure you have written down all of the examples presented in this video because it will help you as a guide when you come to class tomorrow. I look forward to seeing you, and make sure that you bring any questions that you have about this lesson.